Hello, everybody. Avast back at you with a huge video, which I decided to shoot out here. Now that I've designed my new workspace, as you can see, this is really, really good. I think this is like the canvas to really set up a lot of the conversation moving forward. Um, so you can't really hate it because that's about all there is to it. But I've been, pretty hectic moving around, stuff like that, so I haven't really had a chance to actually do much besides meme, which is, things like that. And if I look tired, it's because I am, because I've been doing a lot of moving, staring into the abyss. It stared back. Very macabre stuff going on there. Uh, so it's pretty good. I would say pretty good overall. Uh, but the point of the video that I wanted to shoot out, since it's in a very relevant topic, considering we all sort of know, we all have heard, some allegations that have come out with the thing that a team I was previously associated with. Now, this video is obviously not going to be touching on that topic. I myself will not be commenting on that topic. Um, it's not really my place to do so. Um, but the point of the video that we're going to be discussing today, and that has really been framed by the format you see before you, especially the picture to the right. If you hate minions, you hate the working class. Is the plight of the proletariat player versus just the evil land-owning bourgeoisie of the GMs and owners of Overwatch League. Which, by the way, if you can't tell, I'm being sarcastic because this video is not actually going to be super player centric. Uh, I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about hearing these allegations and what they expect the responsibilities of any professional sports team to be, especially one like the Overwatch League, um, and the light that's been put on Huck in particular and some of the management with Boston. But like it's going to be overarching and not specifically touching on them necessarily. Um, things like that. So I think to kick it off, we're going to talk about player valuations for season one because a lot of people have very skewed perception, and when they look at these leaks or other allegations of players getting low salary or what they assume is low salary, is that Overwatch League season one was an experiment, and you were essentially a venture capitalist in a lot of ways being a player, and the actual venture capitalist involved behind the scenes with funding the league and being involved in the league, and it was unproven. The scene, and also if you were a player, in my personal opinion, and it's also echoed by a lot of people, even though it's unpopular because I was also a player, it's you weren't worth, no player other than Siegel or XTC was worth more than minimum. No one, because the league they brought inherent value to teams and other players did not, and there was an excess of teams or an excess of players, but not really an excess of slots. So obviously demand is going to drive down those salaries. Um, and people overlook as well, which is sort of part of the next topic, but buyouts, specifically buyouts with endemic organizations, and a lot of teams had to pay very exorbitant fees to endemic organizations in terms of buyout to acquire players for season one, which drove down salaries a lot for a lot of different players, especially players that you would not think that are valued that low, players that are and also just teams in general that have performed very well but are filled with very close to minimum or minimum salary um, earners for players. And when you talk about players being locked into contracts or unfair contracts, nothing is really illegal or even immoral necessarily when it comes to these. Players signed a 1 year plus a 1 year deal, which means they agreed to a 1 year, and if the team wants to keep him for the next year at the same salary, unless there's a clause in the contract, which there are for some teams to renegotiate, they're not going to get a pay raise. And sure, teams can feel, or players should say, can feel obligated that they deserve more, and there's a separate discussion to be had about that. But there's nothing immoral or illegal about a team wanting to honor a contract. Um, and that's very important when you look at the framing of discussion of these crazy buyouts or these like players not getting paid what they're worth for season one when it's literally just a natural cause of what season one was. Um, and also people will talk about these crazy buyout fees, but not understanding that buyouts it's not some sort of figure that someone just fucking shat out and just like threw it out into the stratosphere. It's the value when you're purchasing a player from another team and you're not giving them a player in return, you're giving them essentially a cash value for that player while also assuming the value of their contract. So a buyout fee includes, like if it's a 200K buyout, then maybe that's 100K for buying the player, and then maybe their salary is 100K, so it's 200K that a team is paying because you are buying out the other player's contract and that's being paid towards the next person, you know? Like that's a lot of people don't really understand like the actual when you see a number, what that means. It's not just they're paying this much and then they have to pay him. It's they're paying this much and that includes the cost of his salary. Um, and that's very important when framing the discussion of what buyouts are and how integral they are to the scene, because that's how a lot of these orgs, especially in tier two, make money. Though it's also how a lot of these orgs in tier two and why they need protections, because it screws over both players and sort of fucks over orgs in some ways because they have to pay a lot of money for buyouts. So, um, just something to keep in mind rather than be outraged about, I think, a lot of the times. Though I will say that high buyouts are certainly, like I just mentioned, are definitely a way to, in many ways, can be used to manipulate players or hurt their chances in their career and things like that. Something just something to keep in mind. I would say, and continuing that line of thought is, and expanding on it is when it comes to player renegotiation for contracts, I mentioned that there are some teams that include it in their contracts to automatically give raises or even just renegotiate without necessarily guaranteeing anything after the 1 year mark, despite having a 1+1. And like I mentioned earlier, no team has any obligation to do that. It's simply just pretty much a nice gesture from a team. And if a team doesn't choose to do that, not that I'm saying any team has or has not done that, um, I just know some have and some haven't. It's that um, they're not doing anything illegal by not renegotiating a salary in a previously agreed upon contract, and it's not really immoral either. Now, I will say as a counterpoint, and this is very important, if teams want to put out in good faith that they value a player, especially if a player was integral to very important to their success. If they want to put out that they want to develop players and keep them and not just have a rotating door of like, oh, here's a new 18-year-old off the fucking ranked ladder mechanics lord. Let's pick him up for minimum and then just shove him out the door after we've used him, right? Um, if you actually want to develop a legacy, if you want to develop a reason for people to come to you, especially since Overwatch League was such an experiment for season one, and now that the value's been proven, and you see players get proven more, and there's a reason to actually increase investment. Not saying there's a giant reason, but if a good faith reason and a reason to like if you're trying to do good by your players, in my opinion, there is obviously reasons to renegotiate, even if it's not necessarily the agreed upon terms of your contract, because you just want to try to keep a player because you value them. But if a team chooses not to do that, this is still a business at the end of the day, and GMs have to make money for their organizations on top of make a winning team. Um, so if they choose not to renegotiate for whatever reason, that is not a crime if it's part of the contract that the player signed. And there's nothing inherently morally wrong with that. You could argue that, like, sure, it doesn't foster a great environment, but you know, that's that's just how it fucking is. That's the eternal struggle. Is just right there. That's the point of the video. Look to the right. If you hate minions, you hate the working class. That sums it all up. Really, right there. I think also a final component when it comes to this behind the scenes, like the dance between players and organizations, and what a lot of people aren't really considering is, like I've said before, it's a business, um, and there's contracts and legal jargon, and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, fiscal responsibility in esports is something that is actually very rare, in my opinion. I mean, you've heard the news about Infinite within Overwatch having to let a lot of people go. A lot of that is speculated because they just overspent and overestimated growth and did not really cut corners or cut costs. Um, so, I mean, their academy team fell through because of these supposed reasons, uh, and also just like mismanagement on like roster side of things. Echo Fox, even though it's unrelated, had to let a lot of people go due to these various like lots of costs, very little revenue, and that's something that a lot of people don't understand is that esports is targeting a demographic that already A does not have a lot of spending power, and B is the generation of piracy where if they can get something for free, they're gonna get it for fucking free. They're not gonna want to pay for it unless they really want to pay for it, and that's why I think Blizzard in a lot of ways has actually succeeded, or in Overwatch League in a lot of ways succeeded in monetizing the esports league format, while LCS in a lot of I think has failed. Uh, so people aren't realizing there's like a fiscal responsibility aspect of esports, and you can't even if a player you think is worth a lot, and maybe he is worth a lot, teams just aren't always going to be willing to drop the money. And a lot of teams are really bad as well at being, in my opinion, uh, honest honest with their organizations in terms of their budgeting and their economics and ensuring they're doing something that's not just right for players but right for the organization and making sure that they're making a good bottom line and making responsible investments. And this sort of leads in to the overarching, like, oh, this is spawned by the rumors about Boston or whatever. But I actually have a really big respect for Huck in that, and a lot of people do, and how he actually really understands the fiscal sides of esports and how he's looking to try to make sure that it is both um, a continuing cycle of investment and growth, but also it is very stable and sustainable. Uh, in terms of money and the money moving in and out of an organization, which esports is notoriously bad at just absolutely shitting out dollars into a money pit and watching it burn because they overpromise and underdeliver. Uh, and that's something that people are going to have to a lot of people understand too, because there isn't decades of infrastructure and investment, and cities aren't over here subsidizing the stadiums for subsidizing Burbank Studios for Blizzard. So there's like a lot of money issues that have to be solved still with esports. And when you see what you think is an unfair salary situation, and may very well be, it still has a very big underlying cause of, like, some people are trying to be responsible for their organizations for better or worse. And it's a sign that's not seen a lot. And there's not a lot of people that are doing, I think, fiscally responsible moves, not just in esports, but sometimes in Overwatch League itself. And Huck himself is not one of those people. I think he makes very responsible moves. Now, obviously, I'm still not commenting whether, nor agreeing or disagreeing whether his moves are always right, or like or the whole good faith thing about players. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that he's not looking to do it out of anything that comes out is not coming out of malice, and is often might be a little bit misrepresented by player bias, because obviously they want the most money possible. But there's always the double-edged sword of, like, players want the most money possible, orgs want to save the most money and get the most value, and, like, how do you reconcile those? And that's where really good management comes into play, and it's kind of both objective and subjective to see the results. And that's, I think, fans need to understand that when you look at these news and allegations, especially moving forward. As like a final, damn, my chair is so squeaky. This is not just a metaphor for the whole Overwatch League scene. It's functioning, but very loud and obnoxious. Maybe not as efficient as it could be. Um, but as a final point to end off the video, which, as I've done very good job of not touching upon some controversy, but is people talk about players union solving some of these issues, and I agree with that to an extent, because it can help, set salary floors, establish what is good conduct between orgs and players. But a lot of people misunderstand that this is a demographic across many international lines. Uh, these are demographics with very different cultural expectations of work, that can't even really necessarily communicate to each other all the time. That traditional sports leagues with 100 years or more of history took decades to really form a proper player union, and they had much more resources and player base behind them. And in addition, Blizzard literally owns Overwatch. It is their intellectual property. The NFL and the NBA and such do not own the game of basketball or football. FIFA doesn't own football or soccer. Like, you can go to some shitty league somewhere else and go play the game still, because they do not have the intellectual property for it, but Blizzard does. And it presents a very unique set of challenges when it comes to creating a players union. And you could create a toothless one like Riots, but there's still a lot of apathy and a lot of conflict of interest there, in my opinion. I was in the league meetings when we started, well, not the league meetings, but the player union meetings. I was in several, and there's a lot of things presented there that aren't really brought into light when it comes to the challenges of esport player unions and the challenges that are faced, and really what a player union would solve when it comes to contracts that are already previously agreed upon, which is the whole point of this video. Um, and the controversy that a lot of people don't understand are giving people flack and just want to clear up that whole thing. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Um, Give me your feedback here on the canvas. Like what this does for you. I might be rotating out some images, get some get some nice, I really don't know, some nice MS Paint perhaps. I think it's just as beautiful. It really fits the words I'm trying to convey. So I hope this was informative because it was very, very shortly put together.